this week in your lesson, you're going to learn about the Hudson River School of Art, and it's a period of art in American art history. And I'll go into detail in that lesson about it. But the big thing with it is a lot of what they did was landscapes, and they did a focus on how humans impact the land. And so while they were landscapes, sometimes you would see like broken trees in the foreground, and it was supposed to kind of speak to like deforestation, to mankind, conquering the land and basically like taking over the land and destroying land and that kind of thing. And this was back in like the 1800s. So this was before like the environmental movement and all that kind of stuff, but they were speaking to this. So it's kind of like a forerunner to the environmental movement that takes place in the 20th century. A lot of these works have like storms in the sky, or those kinds of things, and it's predominantly nature and landscapes. So what is a landscape? A landscape is a scene that's nature. Okay, so you're not doing a cityscape. Cityscape is like buildings and that kind of stuff. Landscape, it's going to have mountains, it's going to have streams, it's going to have trees, any of that kind of stuff. It's very natural. All right, so you're not going to have like a bunch of buildings or anything like that. It needs to be nature. So you're going to use a watercolor pad. You're going to use your watercolors. I'm actually using my tray paints there. Okay, so you're going to use that, and then you are going to just need some different size brushes. Okay, so you can use some different brushes, different sizes for different things, and of course a pencil, because we always like to kind of sketch in our stuff. Most people tend to be like comfortable doing their landscapes in this layout, like sideways. Some people like doing it vertical, like that one that I showed you guys at the beginning. Okay, so it depends on how you feel and what you want. All right. Okay, so the first step for this project is, of course, you want to figure out what type of a landscape you want to do. Okay, so figure out if you want to do a field, or if you want to do mountains or a stream or something like that. You figure out what type of a landscape you want to do, and then look at some pictures for some inspiration, or if it's somewhere close to where you live, you can go and look at it and draw some inspiration from that. And then you're going to sketch in your basic layout. You are not doing a detailed drawing. Okay, this is just what we call an under sketch. It's like a guideline to figure out, okay, this is what I want to do for this. All right. So the first thing you want to do is, once you've figured out what landscape you're going to do, you're going to sketch in your landscape. Okay. So let's say Miss Capple's partial to mountains. All right. So let's say I'm gonna sketch in some mountains. Watercolor, the big thing with watercolor is that you use the water and you let the water work for you. Okay, there's some different techniques you can do that can be very, very effective. So I'm actually going to lay down just some water on my paper. Okay, like that. And this water is going to be like clouds. Okay. So it's going to be clouds. And I'm probably going to make this kind of a dark sky. I'm going to have some fun with it. Kind of ominous dark sky. But for now, I'm putting the water down. So it'll leave that area kind of clear or white in parts. And that's where my like clouds are going to be. Okay, so then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in with my paint. I'll put this up so you can kind of see it a little bit. I am going to figure out what colors I'm going to use. Okay, so you can see that blue there. Still a little brighter than what I want. So what I'm going to do is kind of tone it down a little bit, and not too much because it's already kind of toned down. It's not super bright, but it's not as dull as I want it. So I'm going to add some color, another color to it. I'm going to add a little bit of black to make it a little more gray. I think that's my black. Let me double check. Yes, it is. Okay. All right, so you can see there I'm adding some black in, and that's just going to kind of make that a little bit of a grayish blue. And you can just kind of go back and forth until you get the right mixture. That's a little too gray, so I'm going to go back and get a little bit more of that blue, pick that up, add that in. Add some more blue in there. Okay. All right, so I've got my color mixed in there. And of course, remember with watercolor, you want to use the water to your advantage. So you want to let the water work for you. Okay, so I'm going to pick up some of that, and I'm just going to kind of streak it through here. You see, I haven't added any more paint. Now I'm just adding like water. And the water moves the paint around for me. Okay, so that can help you not get as many like brush strokes when you're using watercolor. It can also give you some of those more organic designs that aren't quite as don't have like as much of a brush look to them. They look a little more natural. Which if you use it, correctly, it can really like make your painting have like that extra pop to it. Okay, so as I'm going, I'll leave some areas open. I don't know if you can see that. I'll actually leave some areas open. Now this type of painting is a little different than if you've watched, I know like Bob Ross is kind of popular again. If you've watched Bob Ross, he uses oil paint. So oil paint you work up in layers. And I would say like oil, I prefer that method more than watercolor, just personally. But watercolor, like I've seen some watercolor paintings that are absolutely beautiful. Like I play around with watercolor, but it's not like my preferred medium. So I'm just gonna kind of spread that water out some. So now I'll start getting some of that blue in those lighter areas, but it kind of gives it a little bit of that cloud, and I don't want that line to be so pronounced. go in with the darker color. And you see how it's kind of doing what's called blooms. So that's where when it gets added to the water, it travels and works on its own. And that's kind of the fun thing with watercolor, is you can get those type of effects. That's also why using a watercolor pad like I'm using is beneficial, because with watercolor you use so much water that the paper absorbs it, it starts to wrinkle. But when you have something like this, or you tape your paper down, it doesn't, do that as much. Okay, so you can kind of see some of those patterns developing there. I don't know if you guys can see that clearly. There we go. So you see how it's starting to kind of look a little stormy, and you get the impression of like a sky with clouds and that kind of thing going on there. Of course, you could do like a sunny sky. You don't have to do a stormy sky. I'm just doing a stormy sky. Alright, got some darker pigment here, so I'm going to start adding in some more. So when you have let your sky dry, this is going to be the next step that you will do. So my sky is completely dry. Now I'm going to move into doing my mountains. All right, and so my mountains, I'm kind of wanting to do like the mountains like in North Carolina. Actually, let me use that. So if you've been up to like the Blue Ridge Parkway, so our mountains are kind of, it's the Blue Ridge. They have like a bluish color to them. There's stories that supposedly like the Cherokee called it Shikahe. That was the word for it. It meant land of blue smoke. And so there's some of those like legends and stories there, because we have like the Great Smoky Mountains, the Blue Ridge Parkway, and if you go up there and you look at the mountains, they have this like smoky blue kind of look to them, and the scenery changes fast. So you can have like clouds down in the valley, and it just really gives this hazy look, and then the clouds lift and it's like clear and the haze is gone. Like it just is a constantly evolving scenery. So with that, my mountains are going to have a little bit of a blue tone, and I'm going to use the same blue that I used in my sky, and then I'm going to mix it with a green. Okay, so I have kind of this, and I've got it real light because what's in the distance, those mountains are going to be lighter than the mountains in the foreground. And I'll make this even lighter because I'll add water to my mountains. So I just mixed a little bit of the blue I used for the sky with kind of green that also has like a blue tonality to it. All right, so let me clean my brush. And then I'm going to show you a trick that's fun to do for mountains. Okay, there we go. All right, so I'm just picking up some water, and I'm not going to the edge of my mountains, but I'm going kind of like right underneath with some water. And you'll see in a minute why I'm doing this. And you want to use kind of a decent amount, especially on the mountains that are further away. Okay. And this is why you want to use watercolor picker, because you can see all the water I'm using. All right, so now I'm just going to pick up just a little bit of that pigment color. I'm going to go up here on these mountains, go along that edge, and then I'm going to kind of pull it down into the water some. And then go back up here and kind of drop some of that into the water. I don't know if you can see because the light's kind of reflecting, but the paint is, let's see if we can, the paint is actually like expanding into the water. And so it kind of creates this, it's a really cool technique. Kind of like we used for the sky, but it's fun to do with the mountains too, especially to get that kind of hazy feel and that look of like, you know, clouds and stuff that are just kind of sitting right there on the mountain. So I'm just going to kind of go along that crest, drop and move some of that pigment down into that water and let it kind of move around. All right, so I'm going to let this dry a little bit more before I move on to my next layer, and then we'll pick up and work on finishing this painting. Okay, so when you've finished your landscape, you're going to sign your name. Find a corner that works for signing your name. There's a couple of ways you can do it. You can do it with paint. You can use, like an archival type ink, or you can use a paint pen as well. Whatever works for you, whatever you want to use. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Art with Mrs. Cap. I will see you next time as we journey through the world of art and create our own art that's inspired by different periods in art history. See you next time.